And the military just happens to provide this kind of fertile ground for rapid evolution. Probably not so different from any other evolution of game design, except for the pressure cooker environment. Squeeze everybody together, take away all their other options, and give them so much stress that they must do something.
What do you think happens when a bunch of Navy nuclear engineers are stuck together on an aircraft carrier for months? They invent a role-playing game. I got a comment on my video about exploding binary dice from Christian, a Navy vet who mentioned having created a dice system while on deployment, so I asked him to tell me about it.
My name is Christian. I've been kind of doing role-playing games since about the 6th or 7th grade.
Christian is what the soldiers in the Navy called a nerd. He was a nuclear reactor technician who always loved math, and it didn't help that he had played D&D since he was a kid. But like most young kids playing D&D in the 70s and 80s, he didn't actually know the rules at first. So he and his friend who brought him into the hobby just figured it out the best they could and then made up a bunch of stuff along the way.
I was so confused by the whole THACO thing that it was kind of like, oh, roll the dice. Look at it. It's a good number. Cool, you hit.
This came in very handy at the beginning of the 90s, when he and the other techs had to pass the time while spending months at sea with 6,000 other people, a handful of whom had played the RPGs of the time, like D&D, GURPS, Marvel Heroes, and, Car Wars? There are so many role-playing games. Obviously, he couldn't tell me much about the actual deployment because, nuclear-powered aircraft carriers. But he was an engineer among engineers, and engineers are trained to solve problems. I was actually the editor of a book about that, written by the guy who did a video you might have seen about the engineering of aluminum cans. So how about that? Anyway, the biggest problem they needed to solve is that they didn't have any dice. So what did they do?
No, we just cut them out of square stock.
Basically a solid rectangular bar of steel designed to be cut to size.
I had friends in the machine shop, and I'm like, I know how to come up with cubes. There's your dice.
With a few chops and a Sharpie, they made themselves a heaping handful of D6s. Just might want to file off the corners first. So they had their start with making a system, and if there's only one kind of die you can jerry-rig in a naval workshop, D6s are a great choice. Tons of systems have used D6s exclusively, including the very earliest days of D&D. But this was a crew of super math types who needed a system they could use to play basically every tactical role-playing game that each of them wanted to play, but only with D6s and a blank sheet of paper. Meaning, it needed to be a simple, symmetrical, modular system that was all about D6 dice pools. Dice pools meaning handfuls of dice generated by your character's stats. So here's the system that these Navy engineers came up with in the 90s. Each character has a set of skills or attributes that get a number of dice based on their rank. Dice that, remember, are sawed-off steel cubes. To make an attack or check or anything, the player rolls the dice for their skill, probably very loudly, while the GM makes an opposing roll with their own dice pool. After all the dice are rolled, each individual die squares off against one in the opposing pool, starting with the highest. Each attacker or active party's die that wins the mini die-on-die contest goes on to contribute to the success of the entire roll, with ties going to the defender. So in these rolls, if any of the attacking player's dice beat any of the defending GM's dice, the attacker gets some kind of positive result. And it's kind of rare that none of the dice get through. Meanwhile, it's very rare that all of the dice get through. Graphing out the math here is complicated. I studied English and religion, not like nuclear engineering, so I can't explain to you what the chances are if you have 3 dice rolling against 4 or something. But it's perfectly intuitive that having more dice gives you a better chance of rolling numbers that break through. In fact, it guarantees that you will if you have more dice than the opposing side. That's because every extra die you have relative to the opposing side aren't countered by anything. Even if all your highest rolling dice fail, nothing will be left to stop the lowest die, which will give you some kind of little token benefit. So what does this do to the game? It first means that even though the dice can swing a lot, like if you roll all 5s and 6s that succeed, then you're going to have results that are an order of magnitude higher than others. The results can actually be very reliable for a character that's more powerful than the challenges they're facing. They can always count on getting something positive from the roll, even if it's just a little consolation prize. People who know their role-playing games games might say that it's kind of like Shadowrun, because that uses opposed d6 dice pools like this. But of the games I know about, it's actually a lot closer to this obscure award-winning game, Sorcerer. Sorcerer was published at the other end of the 90s, and was very much like a vampire World of Darkness inspired game, but it had this unique dice mechanic of opposed dice pools. Each side rolls their pool of d10s, and whichever side has the single highest die roll wins the contest, the whole thing, with tied dice canceling each other out. After you know who the winner is, you match up the rest of the dice, going from highest to lowest, to give extra victories to the winner, to see how much they won by. In this system, you aren't counting up any totals, so it doesn't matter exactly what the numbers are, just which numbers are bigger than the others. But the interesting difference from Christian's system is in that win or loss at the top. If you lose the roll because your highest die was lower than your opponent's highest die, the rest of your dice can only keep you from losing more. Christian's dice, on the other hand, make it so that if you're good enough, you always achieve something, even if you mostly fail. That's been a big hobby horse of Matt Colville and the people at MCDM making Draw Steel. They really want to get rid of what they call null results, basically a turn where nothing happens. You miss your attack, nothing happens, your turn is over. The target makes their save, nothing happens, your turn is over. But Christian's system is very biased towards something happening when you roll, even if it's just a little bit of something. Draw Steel plans to do the same, where every attack, or nearly every attack, does at least some damage, but with a much more constrained dice system inspired by the dice systems in Powered by the Apocalypse games. But what actually happened when rolls were made in Christian's system? Well, the soldiers playing their game really liked the dice. That they all happily agreed on. But the actual rules of the game, as far as they existed, gets into the culture of soldiers trying to pass the time together in the field.
One of the things that we didn't have is a dedicated games master. We would literally just put boots and boxes and stuff on the table to approximate a map and like say, hey, can I shoot him from here? And we'd all walk around to that side of the table and go, I don't think you got line of sight there, buddy. The military is 99% boredom. And that gave us lots of time to ponder while we weren't playing. We traded hats because who was playing at any one moment would change. And like right in the middle of a session, some of us would have to get up and go on watch, and new people would sit down, and each scenario might even like it might start with one DM and end with another one. So like you thought you were playing in the Old West, and all of a sudden there's Gandalf. And sometimes the rules would change while you were gone. So, I'd be off doing something and I'd come back and they'd go, hey, we did this new thing and it's working really good.
It makes me wonder, how many random little games have been invented by soldiers who are just trying to stay sane together in this crushingly tense boredom of deployment?
A countless number would be the simple answer. Kind of the core card game to all military is spades. But one of the things that occurs with spades is table rules. Like in D&D, we'd call those house rules. And so when you're meeting some new players, one of the first things you do is you kind of go through a list of what is and isn't viable for this table. And, it turns out the card game you're playing isn't really spades. It is a descendant of spades. And I think that that's kind of where a lot of this stuff goes, is everybody starts with something and then they adjust it to be a little bit more of what they'd like. And the military just happens to provide this kind of very fertile ground for rapid evolution. It's probably not so different from any other evolution of game design, except for the pressure cooker environment. Squeeze everybody together, take away all their other options, and give them so much stress that they must do something.
The tragedy of this is that Christian didn't keep any of the dice they used, so we don't get to see this little anthropological piece of gaming culture. But I think stuff like this is really interesting. So if you have your own unusual game design story, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And my channel isn't just about dice, I swear. It's mostly about other game design things. So if you like innovative RPG design in general, then you should check out this channel for more, and my Patreon page and DriveThruRPG for games and supplements you can download for free.